what is Kanplexity and what inspired me to create Kanplexity? Kanplexity is essentially a jumping off point for a complexity framework called Cynefin using Kanban. And I realized after writing it that it doesn't just help people with Kanban, it also helps people with Cynefin, because essentially what it does is it decodes Dave Snowden's wonderful work into layperson's terms so that normal people like myself can understand it. So you can treat Cynefin, this complexity model, as a compass. So as a leader, when you're dealing with a situation, do I trust the experts to solve this, or do we need to get everybody in a room and hope we get the right answer? Or do I need to let people to go off to an incubator to do some invention and innovation? Or do I need to step in and turn into a dictator because we're in really bad chaos, negative chaos, where somebody needs to do something, hopefully not making things worse? So Kanplexity is about giving you a compass as a leader to understand what might be the right thing to do. But for the team, there's also a benefit because it gives them an alternative to Scrum. I'm a Scrum trainer myself. A lot of people are tired of Scrum. They're tired of the rigidity that it has. And there are some people who are really good at using it, but it's kind of losing the argument. People don't like imposed frameworks with really strict rules, even if there's not that many strict rules in Scrum. And so for those who want to use Scrum, let them continue using Scrum. I continue to help them using Scrum. But there are people who need more. They need something different. They still want to have the equivalent of a daily, but does it have to happen every day? They want the equivalent of a sprint, but it doesn't have to be exactly 4 weeks. Does the daily have to be exactly 15 minutes, in maximum? So it's got more flexibility. It says things like, keep it snappy instead of, it has to be 4 hours long. It's more realistic. It's more practical. It's more pragmatic. And it's designed for people outside of software, outside of technology. But actually, it could be used by people in software and technology as well. It's an alternative approach to help you to deal with complexity without having to use Scrum. And it's inspired by many schools of thought. David Marquet's intent-based leadership, for example. Cynefin, we've already mentioned that. Product management, the whole world of Marty Kagan, is inspired by that as well. Lots of people inspired what's in Kanplexity. So essentially, it's a 2022 edition of what agility really is all about. Not so strict. Give people a bit of flexibility, but also give them some guardrails so they don't fall off that cliff. What inspired me to use it? There were some scientists I worked with and some engineers, and they were working on a really complex problem back in 2019. Really complex. It was like off the scale complex, to the extent that it was very difficult to really figure out, how are we going to do this thing? Could we do this thing? How long would it take if we could do it? And deal with the expectations of all the people around us, with the usual expectations of when will it be done and all these kinds of things. And the organization was pushing out Scrum as the pill that you should swallow to do this thing. So I did deal with the team. I wasn't very transparent, but sometimes when there is institutional BS, it's not a good idea to be transparent. Did a Scrum trainer say that? But I helped the team to pretend they were doing Scrum when they weren't doing Scrum. We did Kanplexity. We had the same rhythm as everybody else. So it looked like actually we were doing better Scrum than anybody else, actually, because the rest of the organization wasn't doing Scrum properly anyway. And so, we had a rhythm. And the simple little things like in Scrum, for example, we'd say, don't spend too long getting ready for the sprint review because, we need to focus on doing the work and all that. But actually what we found in practice was if you sent out pre-read to the executives, they would actually read it. And so then we had a review. We didn't have to look at a boring Excel spreadsheet on top of a PowerPoint slide, kind of like, what's that saying? And instead, we were actually looking at the product and playing with the product and looking at photographs of what the team did and making decisions about strategy. It was so cool. It was the most engaging review I've ever had. And it happened every few weeks. And it wasn't exactly 4 weeks. If the executives couldn't be there for 5 weeks or 5.5 weeks, when they were there, that's when we had the session. We were flexible. That's when Kanplexity was born. Then Kanban Guide was born after that, and actually Kanban Guide is a refactored version of the original Kanplexity, and it was co-authored with Daniel Vicanti, but then I forked and I said, okay, let's make Kanplexity available, but let's not reinvent the wheel. We already have Kanban guide. We already have Cynefin. I don't need to re-explain those things. But let's explain to people, how do you deal with complexity without necessarily having to use Scrum? That was the reason.